The Iranian rial has effectively ceased to function, collapsing to 1.4 million per dollar as a historic uprising sweeps across all 31 provinces. With hundreds dead and the internet completely severed, President Trump warns that the U.S. military is locked and loaded to intervene. Tonight we examine if the Islamic Republic has finally reached its breaking point. Let's play this clip.
There seem to be some people killed that aren't supposed to be killed. These are violent, if you call them leaders, I don't know if they're leaders or just they rule through violence. But we're looking at it very seriously. The military is looking at it, and we're looking at some very strong options. Iran called to negotiate. Yesterday. The leaders of Iran called they want to negotiate. I think they're tired of being beat up by the United States. Iran wants to negotiate, yes. We may meet with them. I mean, a meeting is being set up, but we may have to act because of what's happening before the meeting.
We begin tonight with an urgent and rapidly deteriorating situation in the Middle East that has reached what many experts are calling an existential crossroads for the Islamic Republic of Iran. For the past several weeks, a wave of nationwide protests has exploded across the country, but this is not just another cycle of unrest in a nation familiar with dissent. What we are seeing right now is a total breakdown of economic credibility that has pushed once cautious social groups into open defiant revolt. The immediate spark for this chaos was the catastrophic collapse of the Iranian currency, the rial, which plummeted to a staggering 1.4 million per US dollar. This historic low has coincided with inflation rates climbing past 50%, food prices surging by more than 70% year on year, and wages losing their value almost overnight. This is a moment where money itself has stopped making sense for the average person. Protests did not begin on university campuses this time. They began in the heart of the economy, Tehran's Grand Bazaar, before spreading with lightning speed to every single one of Iran's 31 provinces. As we sit here tonight, the Iranian government has imposed a chillingly precise and nearly impenetrable nationwide internet blackout that has lasted for days. Under the cover of this digital darkness, human rights groups report that security forces are using deadly force and live ammunition to disperse demonstrations. The U.S.-based human rights activists news agency reports that at least 538 people have already been killed in the violence, including 490 protesters. More than 10,600 people have reportedly been arrested. Against this backdrop of internal fire, the international stakes have reached a boiling point. President Donald Trump, speaking from Air Force One, has claimed that Iranian leaders have already reached out to negotiate, but he added a significant warning: we may have to act before a meeting. This comes just days after the United States military successfully conducted a raid to seize Nicolas Maduro from Venezuela on January 3rd, a move that has left Iranian elites wondering if they are next in the crosshairs. President Trump has explicitly warned that if Iranian authorities start killing people, Washington would respond with force, stating the U.S. is locked and loaded and ready to go. The Iranian regime, led by Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, is reaching for its familiar playbook of repression and blame, but the old tools are failing to restore order. While the Iranian people are cut off from the world, Khamenei himself continues to post on social media, using his access to claim that the unrest is a soft war orchestrated by the West. However, the narrative on the ground is different. Protesters are now openly linking their domestic misery to the regime's regional ambitions, with some telling reporters they simply want a peaceful, normal life instead of a nuclear program and the funding of armed groups abroad. To understand why the streets are burning with such intensity today, we have to look back at the pattern of the last several years. Iran's leadership has survived repeated shocks before: the 2009 Green Movement, the 2019 fuel protests, and the 2022 Woman Life Freedom Uprising. But those previous movements often centered on a single outrage or a specific social restriction. The 2025-2026 uprising is different because it strikes at the very economic foundations of consent. When shopkeepers cannot price their goods and laborers see their wages evaporate before payday, the state loses its ability to function as an arbiter of daily life. As one analyst noted, the collapse is not just of the rial, but of trust itself. This lack of trust is compounded by the regime's history of lethal crackdowns. To see where this might be headed, we must remember what happened in November 2019. On that occasion, a significant overnight rise in fuel prices led to mass protests across the country between November 15th and 19th. In just 5 days, Amnesty International documented the deaths of at least 304 men, women, and children. The majority of those killings occurred over just 2 days, November 16th and 17th. Security forces, including the Revolutionary Guards and the paramilitary Basiji, were found to have used lethal force unlawfully, often shooting protesters in the head or torso with the clear intent to kill. Amnesty's research into those 2019 killings provides a grim window into the regime's current tactics. They found that out of 304 documented deaths, 236 were adult men, 10 were adult women, and at least 23 were children. Most of the victims were in their 20s and 30s. These were people like Mohammed Amin al-Gholi, a 23-year-old shot in the heart in Fardis, and Ali Ghazlavi, a 12-year-old boy killed in Khorramshahr. In the aftermath of those 2019 protests, the Iranian authorities orchestrated a ruthless campaign to intimidate the families of the dead, forcing them to sign undertakings that they would not speak to the media or hold public memorial ceremonies. Security officials even attended funerals to ensure these restrictions were observed. Today, the regime is attempting the same cover-up, but the scale of the crisis is significantly larger. 6 years ago, the suburbs around Tehran suffered the most. But today, the uprising has penetrated into smaller towns and economically marginalized areas that were previously seen as more stable. The social coalition is broader than ever, mobilizing bazaar merchants, students, urban professionals, and ethnic minorities all at once. And while slogans like "Woman, Life, Freedom" remain powerful, the center of gravity has shifted toward a demand for total regime change. Chants are being heard in major cities like Isfahan and Mashhad calling for the end of the Islamic Republic itself. The response from the United States has also evolved. During the first Trump administration, a maximum pressure campaign was launched, involving over 1,500 sanctions that targeted Iran's financial, oil, and shipping sectors. That policy aimed to deny the regime the revenue it needed to carry out malign activities and intervene in regional conflicts. While those sanctions severely damaged the economy and pushed the rial to record lows, they did not initially cause the government to collapse. However, they set the stage for the economic paralysis we are seeing now. In 2018, the United States withdrew from the 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA, which had previously exchanged sanctions relief for limits on Iran's nuclear program. The Trump administration argued the deal was deficient because it did not address Iran's missile program or its human rights abuses. Following that withdrawal, the U.S. designated the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC, as a foreign terrorist organization. This was the first time an official military unit of a sovereign state had been so designated. In retaliation, the Iranian parliament labeled the entire United States military as terrorists. The escalation reached a critical point in January 2020, following the assassination of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani in a U.S. drone strike near Baghdad. Soleimani was the head of the Quds Force and a central figure in Iran's regional military strategy. His death prompted Iranian missile attacks on U.S. bases in Iraq and briefly brought the two nations to the brink of war. Just hours after those missile strikes, the IRGC accidentally shot down a Ukrainian passenger plane, killing all 176 people on board. That event reignited public anger inside Iran, leading to widespread protests against the leadership's incompetence and deception. Now, in 2026, the regime finds itself in a much weaker position than it was during those previous crises. Its external buffers have eroded. In Syria, Bashar al-Assad is no longer in power, removing a key regional ally. Military strikes in 2025 significantly damaged Iran's nuclear infrastructure, and many of its proxy groups in Gaza and Lebanon have been degraded. At home, the regime's time-tested formula of using fear to restore order is losing its grip. Analysts say that while the crackdowns still instill terror, they no longer restore the confidence of the people. The current internet shutdown is a clear indication of the government's desperation. Experts say this blackout represents a new high water mark in sophistication. Unlike the 2011 shutdown in Egypt, which effectively paralyzed the government's own ability to operate, the Iranian authorities have developed a more fine-tuned approach. They have whitelisted certain government websites and propaganda channels, allowing officials to continue communicating while the rest of the population is plunged into a digital void. Even satellite systems like Starlink are being jammed in some neighborhoods to prevent information from leaking out. Despite these efforts, images and messages continue to trickle out, primarily ferried by activists using private lines. BBC Persian has reported seeing text messages sent by the government inviting people to attend pro-establishment rallies, even as regular citizens find themselves unable to send messages to their own families. In some cities, like Sari, security forces have reportedly placed the population under complete martial law. In Tehran, witnesses have described intense crackdowns, and refrigerated trucks have been seen arriving at makeshift morgues outside the city. One count in a Tehran morgue found at least 180 bodies wrapped in white shrouds. The official line from the Iranian government is to project a sense of calm on state television while labeling protesters as vandals or terrorists. The national police chief, Ahmad Reza Radan, has announced the arrest of main elements of the movement, promising they will be punished through legal procedures. The Attorney General has even warned that anyone caught protesting or helping protesters could be charged as an enemy of God, a crime that carries the death penalty in Iran. While the regime threatens its people, it is also bracing for potential external conflict. The Iranian parliament speaker, Mohammad Bakr Kalibaf, a former Revolutionary Guard commander, has warned that any U.S. intervention would lead to American bases and ships throughout the Middle East becoming legitimate targets. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has stated that while the country does not seek war, it is even more prepared than it was during previous conflicts. The tragedy of this situation is perhaps best understood through the methodology of those who track human rights abuses. Amnesty International's investigation into the 2019 killings involved speaking directly to relatives, neighbors, and eyewitnesses. They cross-checked funeral posters, gravestone pictures, and burial certificates. They found that the Iranian authorities often refused to return the bodies of the dead unless families signed agreements not to speak out. In some cases, officials refused to hand over the victims' phones, likely to suppress evidence of state violence. The names from 2019 are a haunting reminder of the human cost of the current unrest. Victims like Ahad Bashare Doragi, a 22-year-old shot in Mashhad, or Amineh Shabazifard, a 35-year-old mother shot in the head in Malard. These were not terrorists or enemies of God, but ordinary citizens caught in the crossfire of a regime's struggle for survival. Amnesty documented cases where protesters were shot while posing no imminent threat to life, and even bystanders were killed by indiscriminate fire. The United States has a long and complex history with Iran that informs today's policy decisions. Relations were shattered in 1979 following the Islamic Revolution and the subsequent 444-day hostage crisis. Since then, every U.S. administration has viewed Iran as a significant threat to regional interests. The Reagan administration designated Iran a state sponsor of terrorism in 1984. The Clinton administration pursued dual containment to keep Iran and Iraq weak. The George W. Bush administration famously included Iran in the axis of evil. The Obama administration attempted a different approach, emphasizing diplomacy and engagement, which eventually led to the JCPOA in 2015. President Obama expressed hope that the deal would usher in a new era of relations, but the results were mixed. Iran continued its regional interventions and ballistic missile tests, leading many in Congress and the subsequent Trump administration to believe the deal was fundamentally flawed. The return of Donald Trump to the White House has seen a revival of the maximum pressure strategy, but this time it is occurring in an environment of total economic collapse inside Iran. While President Trump has ruled out a formal policy of regime change, stating instead that he is looking for no nuclear weapons, his rhetoric often suggests a deeper goal. He has consistently stated his support for the Iranian people to have a government they deserve, and has accused Iranian leaders of stealing national wealth to enrich themselves. State Department reports have long cited Iran for a wide range of abuses beyond the suppression of protests. These include the escalating use of capital punishment, the execution of minors, and harsh, life-threatening conditions in prisons. Iran has one of the highest per capita execution rates in the world. In 1988, thousands of prisoners were executed in a mass purge that has never been fully accounted for by the government. Current Judiciary head Ibrahim Raisi has been accused of involvement in those 1988 executions. Minority groups in Iran also face systematic discrimination. While the country is 90% Shiite, there are significant populations of Sunnis, Kurds, Azeris, Arabs, and Baluchis. Groups like the Baha'is are subject to unrelenting repression as the regime considers their religion heretical. Ethnic Arabs in the southwest have complained of torture and a prohibition on studying their own language. Often, the regime uses the threat of separatism to justify crackdowns on these communities. In the current crisis, the social coalition has moved past these ethnic and religious divides. Bazaar merchants, who were historically a pillar of support for the clergy, are now part of the opposition. Even within the security forces, there are signs of potential fragmentation. The IRGC is not a monolith. While some members are die-hard ideologues, others joined for economic security. If the central authority continues to weaken, there is a risk that different units within the security forces could compete rather than coordinate, leading to further instability. History offers little comfort for those looking for a clean transition of power. Some illegitimate regimes, like North Korea, have survived for decades despite being zombie states. Others, like Syria, have collapsed into catastrophic civil war. Iran currently sits uncomfortably between those two outcomes. The protests have shattered the regime's moral and economic credibility, but the opposition remains fragmented and the security forces remain heavily armed. The role of the United States remains a central point of contention. Iranian officials have long cited U.S. statements as evidence of foreign interference, a claim they are making again today as they struggle to contain the protests. They point to the 1953 CIA-supported uprising that toppled Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh as the original sin of U.S. involvement in their country. However, for the people on the streets of Tehran and Kermanshah, these historical grievances are increasingly secondary to the immediate reality of being unable to feed their families. The France exit reports, suggesting that some regime elites are quietly seeking a way out of the country, highlight the sense of dread within the leadership. They are facing a population that increasingly sees no path forward within the existing system. Cosmetic changes, such as reshuffling economic officials or promising a new charter for citizens' rights, have repeatedly failed to satisfy a public that understands where the real power lies. As we look at the makeshift morgues and the silent streets of Sari, the question is no longer whether the regime is in crisis, but whether it can survive a moment where money, trust, and order have all vanished at once. President Trump's very strong options remain on the table, and the Iranian military is even more prepared than before, creating a volatile standoff that could redefine the Middle East for a generation. In Washington, the debate continues over the best way to support the aspirations of the Iranian people. For years, the U.S. has funded democracy promotion programs, including efforts to help Iranians circumvent internet censorship. These programs have always been controversial, with some activists inside Iran fearing that U.S. support makes them targets for the regime's intelligence services. Yet, in a time of total blackout, the importance of satellite internet services like Starlink has become a vital lifeline for getting information out to the world. The tragedy of the 2019 protests was the systematic impunity that followed. Despite Amnesty International's calls for an independent inquiry, no such investigation ever took place within Iran. Instead, the authorities entrenched that impunity by harassing the grieving families and refusing to reveal the true death toll. Today, as the shrouds pile up in Tehran once again, the world is watching to see if the outcome will be any different. The bankruptcy of the regime, both literal and figurative, is now in full view. It has endured a year of economic collapse, environmental crises, and regional setbacks. The rial at 1.4 million to the dollar is more than just a number. It is a symbol of a system that can no longer provide the basics of life for its citizens. As one former U.S. ambassador noted, the regime simply doesn't have the resources to address the sources of the protests this time. If the protests of 2022 were about dignity and bodily autonomy, the protests of 2026 are about survival. You can delay a demand for dignity, but you cannot delay the need for food and a living wage. This distinction is why this wave of unrest is being described as the most dangerous the Islamic Republic has ever faced. We will continue to monitor the situation as it develops, particularly the reports of significant arrests and the possibility of U.S. military action. The internet blackout makes verification difficult, but the voices trickling out of the country through Starlink and other private channels tell a story of a nation at a breaking point. The names we read tonight, the victims from 2019, stand as a testament to the cost of dissent in Iran. Victims like Ali Bavi, a 25-year-old shot in the head, and Amineh Shabazifard, the 35-year-old shot in Malard. Their stories are being repeated now in cities across the country as a new generation faces the same lethal force in their quest for freedom. As the U.S. military readies its fighter jets and the Iranian leadership calls for national resistance marches, the people of Iran remain caught in the middle. They are looking at freedom, perhaps like never before, as the U.S. president has said, but that freedom is currently being measured in blood and white shrouds. The significance of the real's collapse cannot be overstated. It is the engine driving this uprising and the reason why the old patterns of repression may no longer work. When the state can no longer arbitrate daily life through a functioning currency, it loses its last grip on the population. In the coming days, we will see if the regime's whitelist approach to the internet allows it to sustain the blackout long enough to crush the movement, or if the sheer scale of the economic collapse makes that impossible. We will see if the negotiations President Trump mentioned are a real opening or just another tactical maneuver in a long history of adversarial relations. Tonight, Iran is on edge. The world is watching the Grand Bazaar, the streets of Tehran, and the makeshift morgues for any sign of what comes next. Whether this is the end of a regime or the beginning of an even more violent chapter remains to be seen. One thing is certain, the pattern has broken. The Islamic Republic is facing a broad social coalition that has moved past reform and is now demanding a fundamental change. They are facing a U.S. administration that has shown it is willing to act decisively in the region. And they are facing a population that has decided that the cost of silence is finally higher than the cost of revolt. The stories of the 304 people killed in 2019 were a warning that the world largely ignored. The details of their deaths, the bullet penetration in the head, the heart, the neck, were documented by Amnesty, but met with silence from the authorities in Tehran. Now, as the shrouds are counted by the hundreds once again, that silence is being filled by the chants of millions. The economic anatomy of this uprising is clear. It is a crisis of commerce, of trust, and of survival. It is a crisis that the regime's traditional tools are unequipped to handle. And it is a crisis that has brought the Middle East to the brink of a major transformation. We will be here to bring you the facts as they emerge from behind the digital Iron Curtain. We will continue to cite the documented deaths, the economic data, and the official statements from all sides. Because in a moment this volatile, the truth is the only thing that can cut through the propaganda and the darkness. The real at 1.4 million, the 84-hour blackout, the 538 dead. These are the facts of the Iran uprising tonight. We thank you for joining us for this special long-form report. Stay safe, and we will see you back here tomorrow as this historic situation continues to unfold. The history of the Pahlavi dynasty and the 1979 revolution reminds us that change in Iran can happen with shocking speed. The current calls for the return of the Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi, rhetoric that once would have meant a swift execution, show how far the public has moved. The regime that was founded on opposition to Western influence is now being challenged by a population that sees its own leaders as the greatest threat to their future. As we conclude, we remember the children whose names are on the 2019 list. Abulfazl Shabani, 16 years old. Amireza Abdullahi, 13 years old. Ali Musavi, 12 years old. They are the faces of the cost of this long struggle. And their names are a reminder that behind every statistic is a family searching for truth and justice. Good night.